day that you got a diagnosis?
I guess it was, we knew it was coming. We had sort of an informal diagnosis several weeks earlier, but this was more of a confirmation with additional testing and on the slides, biopsy slides and so on. Plus the, this was at Stanford Hospital, and I had a PET scan the day before and a CT scan that morning, and then all of the information went to the Stanford Hospital Tumor Board. They met at 3 o'clock, and then at about 4:30, my wife and I met with Dr. White, and he was a surgeon, and Dr. Heather Wakely, who's the oncologist there. And we had basically, when I'd been in the hospital 3 weeks earlier with the pleural effusion, they had taken samples, and those were tested preliminarily and came back with what is it, abnormal meso cells. And so they thought that this was probably going to be the diagnosis. So the formal diagnosis was just sort of a confirmation for us. That,
what was the source of your exposure to asbestos?
my primary exposure was very probably in the Navy. I was a naval officer in charge of engine room, fire room on an ammunition ship in 1964 to 66. So I spent a lot of time in the engineering spaces, and the whole ship in those spaces is just laced with asbestos. It's everywhere, all the equipment, all the insulation, everything.
Have you reached out to the VA?
Yes, I have submitted a claim to the VA, and that's being processed now.
What is their reaction?
It's sort of funny, the initial reaction, I submitted a claim, they sent a letter back, which is quite nice, saying, yes, we got the claim, it'll take us a while to get to you. So at least you knew that they got the claim. And then we got a letter a couple months ago saying they had my claim, they were working on it. Excuse me, and if I wanted to submit more data, hospital data or something to substantiate my claim, to do so. But my claim was listed with the VA as mesothelioma as a result to exposure to Agent Orange, which not only did I not have any exposure to Agent Orange, it has nothing to do with mesothelioma.
So you believe that there'll be a lot of people that went through that. I mean, you were not alone in that situation, so.
That's what's amazing to me. There were probably 50 of us in the gangs that ran the boilers and the main engines and all the auxiliary equipment down there. Most of whom were actually in the spaces more than I was, so they would have more exposure.
Now, my understanding is you went to Stanford with an esteemed colleague.
I was in the class of 61 at Stanford, member of Sigma Alpha Epsilon fraternity, and one of my fraternity brothers, who was a year or two behind me, was Max Baucus, and Max was from Montana, and pretty quiet guy, and never realized till sometime later he ended up in the Senate and is now one of the senior senators in the country, the senior senator from Montana. So.
What would you like Max to know about asbestos? I mean, he must have an awareness with Libby in his
Yes,
constituency.
And that's what I've heard, you know, that he was, I think last year he was one of the sponsors of Asbestos Awareness Day or Awareness Week. And it made me think that, you know, Max is obviously aware and deeply concerned because of the problems at Libby with the people of the town of Libby, Montana. And I have thought that maybe it would be important to put a personal face on the disease, you know, somebody that he knew 40 years ago. And, you know, I've seen him a couple times since then at reunion type events. But to be able to put a personal face on it, to give it a more, a real feeling. I mean, it's one thing to know that, you know, a lot of people are afflicted with the disease, either asbestosis or mesothelioma, but, and you may get to meet those people, but to find it happening to somebody that you knew back when you were in college and so on, I think it can hammer home a much more personal level on the disease, and that it's not just happening to people in Libby or people in Manchester, like we were talking at the conference today, the gals from UK. That there are a whole lot of people that have been exposed in many different ways. So it's a disease that you might think, oh, that's somebody else is going to get that. And then, you know, you don't know until maybe 40 years later that you've got it. And it could be any one of us.
As an architect,
excuse me,
how difficult do you think it would be to dial back asbestos? It's in so much of our building material.
They dialed it back radically in the late 70s and 80s. And it was astonishing to me to find out yesterday the number of building products that are currently in use today that still contain asbestos. I, as an architect, believe that asbestos has been eliminated excuse me, from building materials back in the late 70s, early 80s. I find that extraordinarily shocking. And just knowing how the construction process goes, and probably more of a problem is demolition process. And as the years go on, demolition becomes more and more a problem, because there's more and more pardon me, buildings that have been built, you know, in the early years that have outused their useful lives, and so they're going to be torn down. And that's when the asbestos that is contained in them is released into the atmosphere again.
Do you think there's enough research going into asbestos mitigation?
No. I don't think there's a commitment in the U.S. at least to asbestos research of any kind. There's some private organizations who have made commitments, but they're relying on private funding, and makes it much more difficult. But there certainly isn't any appreciable government sponsorship or government funding of asbestos research.
Where do you go from here?
I don't know. One of the reasons my wife and I are here this weekend was to maybe get some more information and help in making this decision. My wife in particular has spent countless hours on the internet since last August. And we've, I can't, can't even estimate the number of hours we've spent discussing it, reviewing information, and trying to figure out what is the best solution for me, what's the best course of treatment.
And has being at this conference been helpful?
Extraordinarily valuable. Much more valuable than I ever would have dreamed possible.